We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast. This is Abe, your host. I just got off work. It is 8:11. Today is December 16th. Just figured I'd do a podcast. I'm off today. And I don't know. I try to choose a subject different from stuff. I try not to make myself stuck in a rut, I guess, stuck in one lane of traffic. I try to broaden the horizons and make each episode totally different from the last episode. So, I know when we first started, we did a lot of UFO and ghost stories and stuff, because that's all I had on hand at the time, because I didn't have internet. It was crazy. I lived out in the country and would pretty much use books and articles, like physical copy on hand, record it, save it onto a SD card for my phone, and then publish it at work while I was working, like with Wi-Fi, because we had no internet. It was hillbilly, man, but I was still putting the podcast out for you all, so I hope that at least shows my effort that I put into this. But yeah, I tried to I tried to give you guys something different for every episode. So today's episode we're doing is the subject of mummies. Usually like to give a little update. We will not be going and searching for Goatman today because the weather's bad here in Kentucky. So that kind of sucks. That kind of makes me a little sad. I don't know, though. I really don't think it's too bad. So maybe Sammy will get up, and when she does, maybe we'll go, maybe not. Who knows? I'm kind of tired, though, honestly, so it doesn't bother me to not go. But that's about it. Today, we are going to be studying, I know, in general, when people think of mummies, they think Egypt. We're actually going to be going all around the globe, or flat realm, if you believe, flat plane, all over the place with different mummies from different areas. We have the Etsanal Princesses. They lived lives of prestige and power. In death, these women still command attention. And I'm going to pick up several little articles. This one's by Nathaniel Sharping. There is something disconcerting. And this is, by the way, it's an older, older story, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's timeless. I think it's historical, you know. There is something disconcerting about looking at a face of someone who has been long departed from this world and realizing that they look just like you. That connection to the past has long intrigued archaeologists, for whom mummies represent an opportunity to gain first-hand information about ancient cultures. Preserved tissues hold a treasure trove of information. The diseases individuals had, their diet, their genetic information. the microbes they carried with them, and in many cases, clues about the politics and culture of the time. Our minds may leap to Egypt at the word mummy, but cultures across the world have developed techniques meant to forestall decomposition. For many of these people, mummification preserved the perceived connection between the physical body and the immortal soul. Just as they needed each other in life, so too were soul and body linked in the afterlife. In many cultures, mummification was also a status symbol. Preparing a body took significant time and effort, which meant the process wasn't available to just anyone. Receiving such lavish treatment signaled to others that you were revered and admired. While King Tut is arguably the first famous mummy, many of the others found around the world are women, young and old. These eternal princesses have taken on a second life as cultural and scientific ambassadors for the civilizations they left behind. When they were alive, they were women of significance. In death, they may be even more so. So Lady Dice. She was a minor aristocrat, but Lady Di, this is D-A-I, by the way, not Lady Diana. But she enjoyed the sumptuous trappings of her role as the wife of a provincial nobleman during the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BC. And by the way, if you're listening through Google Podcast, Breaker, Spotify, Anchor, Radio Public, check us out on YouTube, because during the podcast we play little slideshow pictures to go along with the podcast, so you can actually see images of what we're talking about. And if you're on YouTube, you can check us out on those alternative platforms. We're also on BitChute now. So, buried deep within a hillside in south-central China, her perfectly preserved tomb was discovered in 1972 by workers digging an air raid shelter. The small room is filled with the objects that defined her comfortable life. Exquisite lacquerware dresses, slippers, beauty products, and containers of her favorite meals, including swans and other birds. Lady Di's veins are still filled with blood, and nearly all of her soft tissues are intact. Her skin is pliable enough that researchers were able to bend her arms and legs. One of the world's best preserved mummies. Lady Di is so well kept that Chinese doctors were able to perform an autopsy more than 2,000 years after her death. They found that it was a love of the good life that probably took her out of it. She may have been pampered, but Lady Di was anything but healthy. Although she was only around 50, the autopsy revealed a litany of health complications that included high cholesterol, diabetes, hypertension, and schistosomiasis. Sorry. It sounds bad, but that's how it's spelled, man. A parasitic infection. Despite these ailments, Lady Di maintained her lavish lifestyle until the very end, when poor health caught up with her. She overindulged perhaps in a feast, and then she had a heart attack, and that was the end of her, says Charles Higham, a researcher at the University of Otago in New Zealand, who has studied Lady Di extensively. In keeping with her station, Lady Di was buried in a tomb that also contained her husband and son. Though their bodies were not so well preserved, she was wrapped in 10 layers of silk and laid to rest in a series of 4 nested coffins covered in lacquer. To keep out air, and water, the tomb builders encased her entire cypress wood sepulchre in a layer of charcoal and kaolin clay several feet thick. Archaeologists also found traces of mercury in her coffin, indicating that the toxic metal may have been used as an antibacterial agent. This kind of brings me back to a documentary I watched. Might not have been a documentary, but Jordan Maxwell, for some reason, is coming to mind, that he spoke about there was a room full of mercury in one of the secret chambers of Giza, which is odd, but for some reason I'm remembering something like that within the cobwebs of my skull. Something to delve into. Alright, but I digress. The Han had the idea that if you wanted to go into the afterlife and live forever, you had to preserve the body, much like the ancient Egyptians. Says Higham. They were no fools, you know. They knew all about decomposition, which is why they took such pains to wrap her and seal her tomb. Most Chinese nobles of this period made attempts to preserve their bodies after death, but few succeeded. Many of them were laid to rest in jade coffins or even jade suits of armor under the misguided notion the precious stone would protect them from decay. Lady Di endured, however, simply because she was so thoroughly sealed from the environment. And now we get into the Siberian Ice Maiden, located in Russia. Found in Siberia's Altai Mountains, the mummified remains of the Ice Maiden lay for millennia in an undisturbed tomb surrounded by sacrificial offerings and valuable possessions. When Russian archaeologist Natalie Poloskmak exhumed her body in 1993, locals decreed the removal of the mummy, which they believed to be the remains of a legendary princess. Finds at her burial complex do indeed indicate the maiden was an important member of the Pizryk people, and that's spelled, or Pazryk, Pazyryk. Pazryk people roamed southeastern Siberia more than 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists working at the site found the remains of 6 horses, a costly sacrifice among the nomadic Pazryk, which, by the way, you find that a lot in ancient Egyptian tombs, burial tombs, that they sacrificed the animals of the owners so that way their souls could go on to the afterlife together. And if you were a slave or perhaps a eunuch under the household of that certain elite, you got sacrificed too, baby. Just saying. Complete with saddles and gold-trimmed harnesses. The excavation team also found the bodies of a teenager and a man with a fatal head injury, perhaps killed to accompany the maiden to the afterlife. See, this is why I believe in Atlantis theory, that we all were interconnected way back in the day, perhaps before an apocalypse that already occurred. You find similarities all across the globe, or flat map, whichever you prefer. I could care less. I'm agnostic when it comes to flat or round. You find the same stuff, the same stories, the same beliefs everywhere. We are more alike than we are different. I promise you that, my friend. The maiden herself was wrapped in a silk tunic from India, stained with dyes of exotic origin, possibly from as far away as the Mediterranean coast. With her was an ornate Chinese mirror, a small pouch filled with cannabis. Haha, nice, she was getting high. A burial in permafrost, as well as an elaborate mummification process, preserved her. Her embalmers separated her head from her body and pulled out cartilage, eyes, and sinuses. Her breastbone, rib cartilage, and internal organs were also removed before the body cavity was stuffed with grasses and sewn up with horsehair. Researchers also detected evidence of mercury on her body. So there you go with the mercury again. They're using mercury all over the world, dude. Why? What's going on? If you know in the comment section, hit me up. Even though she was no older than 30, an eclectic collection of tattoos crowds her skin. The menagerie includes beast both wow, Freudian slip. I apologize. Beasts both mythical and real, including a stylized fantastical deer adorning her left shoulder. And there you go, synchronicities, man. I have been having synchronicities like crazy. A deer. Nice. That's my wife's spirit animal, hence the deer cartoon. She's the deer, I'm the rabbit. Maybe one day, who knows? There might be a jackalope. Unfortunately, we know little about the Ice Maiden, actually, who was during her time on Earth. She was probably in pain for the last several months of it, though based on evidence from medical imaging and forensic analysis, possibly weakened from what appears to be breast cancer. MRI scans revealed abnormal tissue growth that may have been malignant tumors. She fell from her horse. The fall injured her right hip and shoulder. She also suffered a blow to the head. Even then, researchers think she may have hung on to life for some time before finally succumbing, based on healing at the fracture sites. During this period, she probably relied on cannabis to soothe her pain, and psychedelic visions that likely resulted may have given her status as a shaman or a healer. According to Polismock, the fact that she was buried alone, the other individuals were in a separate part of the grave complex, may be another sign of her special status. The presence of cannabis in her tomb may not be that meaningful, though, says Adrienne Mayer, who wrote about the maiden in The Amazons, Lives and Legends of Warrior Women Across the Ancient World. That's the title of his book. Most of Pazrik people were found buried with cannabis. And Mayer doesn't believe that she was necessarily a priestess or a medicine woman. She could have just been a woman of high standing attempting to cope with debilitating pain. Now let's take a little flight within the minds. Hopefully I narrate good enough to where you can visualize. The great ones before me used to have that ability, and hopefully I still provide or can carry on that ability to you. We travel to the Andes now. La Doncella. High among the Andes in Argentina, La Doncella the maiden was taken to the top of a mountain and left to die some 500 years ago. She was a capacocha, a sacrifice offered to the gods by the Inca in exchange for continued prosperity. Not just anyone was fit to be a capacocha. Children were selected from the villages, likely chosen for their beauty and purity. The boys were taken to the Incan capital of Cuzco and sacrificed immediately. The girls were sent to compounds where they assisted priests. These chosen girls, called Akla, helped prepare chicha, a fermented corn beverage, and other ritual items, says Johann Reinhard. an independent researcher who has done extensive work on high-altitude archaeological sites. He discovered La Doncella's body during 1999 just beneath the summit of Luliyalaku, one of the tallest mountains in South America. During annual religious ceremonies or an extreme circumstance such as severe drought, the most perfect of the Akla would be chosen to become Capacocha and offered as a tribute. Preparatory rituals could be lengthy and sometimes involve a months-long procession that wound its way from village to village through the empire. Each stop an opportunity for the residents to celebrate the sacrificial victim's passage. During these final months, La Doncella, in her early teens, would have been treated like royalty. Chemical analysis of her hair shows a dramatic change in diet, as well as regular doses of coca leaves and alcohol from a special ritual beer. These substances were thought to enhance spiritual experiences, but were likely also used to ensure that children remained in a state of drug compliance. La Doncella's journey ended some 22,000 feet above sea level in the mountains. Her body was discovered tucked into a hollow in the rock, head slumped sleepily into her chest. Probably the crash from all that cocaine, dude. That and alcohol, man. Speedballing. She was dressed in finely woven alpaca fur and adorned with ornaments of gold and silver. With her was a spondylus shell, a type of mollusk native to Ecuador, and are highly prized by Inca, for whom it likely signified the life-giving water that sustains their crops. The young woman died peacefully, in all likelihood. There was no sign of trauma, and it was probably a combination of coca leaves, alcohol, and the deadly cold that allowed her to slip into a final sleep. Like I said, speedballing. That's a good way to die, I guess. A peaceful way, I would imagine, perhaps, maybe. I've never went to it, unless I'm speaking to you as a ghost. To the Inca, however, a sacrificial death may have been more transcendental than final. According to Reinhard, the children who served as sacrifices were in effect deified and worshipped as intermediaries to the gods. Intermediaries. The beauty of Ziho, and that's how I'm going to pronounce it. I'm probably butchering it, but it's spelt Xiaohe. Now we are in China. In the middle of the desolate Taklamakan Desert, on the far western edge of China and surrounded by forbidding mountains, a necropolis descends for 5 levels into the sands. Inside the how did I pronounce it before? Zohe, I'm just going to say Zohe, tomb complex are about 300 burials dating to around 2000 BC. The bodies belong to an ancient society of farmers and herders who once managed to eke out a living in their arid mountains, first found by a local hunter in the 20th century, but not extensively excavated until 2002. The burial complex's extreme environment was a boon to archaeologists. The low humidity and freezing winters spared some of the bodies from the ravages of decomposition, and none endured better than the beauty of Zohe, whose body had survived even down to her delicate eyelashes. She's stunning. I call her the Marlene Dietrich of the desert, says Victor Mayer, a professor of Chinese language and literature at the University of Pennsylvania. Her name lost to the ages. The beauty wore a tall hat of white felt and fur-lined boots. She's got the boots with the fur. Her body was surrounded by grave goods, including an intricately carved wood phallus placed on her chest. In the harsh climate, fertility was likely highly prized, says Mayer. Overt sexual symbolism adorns the graves, and both men and women were buried with wooden decorations representing sexual organs. Their erstwhile homeland falls within China's borders now, but the bodies, many with red or light brown hair, have distinctively Western features. Huh. How odd. So where do these desert dwellers come from? The clues we have only a hint at their possible origins. DNA tests indicate that their ancestry was a mix of a Eurasian populations. Mayer believes, based on their genetic signatures and fragmentary evidence about their language, that they come from somewhere between southeastern Europe and the Ural Mountains. Over the course of generations, they must have worked their way east across the windswept steppes. Moving herds from pasture to pasture, they settled in the Taklamakan Desert. Mayer believes because it offered protection in the form of isolation, their surroundings were desolate, he says. But they must have built a vibrant city, as evidenced by their richly symbolic burials. Human beings are very adaptable, and no matter where they settle, no matter what difficulties they face, they try to create some quality of life, Mayer says. You don't have to have luxurious conditions and material wealth to have an interesting, meaningful life. And here we have the best for last. The queen bee, you might say. We go to Egypt now. Nefertiti. Nefertiti may be the most famous missing woman in the world. Her story has all the elements of a good mystery. A beautiful woman, a missing body, political intrigue, and a decades-long debate over her fate. We now know that she existed, thanks to hieroglyphic writings that indicate she was a queen and mother of 6 during Egypt's 18th dynasty around 1300 BC. And we have an idea of what she might have looked like from the Berlin bust, an iconic piece by the sculptor Tutmos, created during his lifetime, that now resides in a German museum. That's about all we know, though. What her role was in life, whether she was Tutankhamun's mother, and the circumstances surrounding her death all remain unknown. Identifying her body would answer some of those questions, but we have not yet discovered a tomb bearing her name. Probably because those tombs and pyramids I do not believe are burial tombs, and pyramids for, I don't know, dead kings. That's just my belief. This is Conspiracy Corner Podcast, but that's a whole other episode on what those pyramids and those tombs actually are. But I digress. That's about all we know. What are blah, 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 blah. That's not for lack of trying, of course. The search has gone on for decades, with competing and often hotly contested quote-unquote theories. The latest chapter in the saga began in 2015 when University of Arizona Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves claimed to have discovered evidence of another chamber in Tutankhamun's tomb, in the Valley of the Kings, based on radar scans. He theorized that the room could contain Nefertiti, inciting a storm of controversy. Further scans cast doubt on his conclusions, however, and it appears that the search for her body has again come up empty-handed. Another theory holds that a mummy called the Younger Lady, quote unquote, discovered in 1898, is actually Nefertiti. The mummy was found in a side chamber of the tomb of Amenhotep II, the great-grandfather of Nefertiti's husband. Its age is right, and other clues point to a royal burial, including the symbolic positioning of her arms. A comparative analysis of her facial features indicated a match to the Berlin bust. But other researchers believe, based on a controversial DNA study, that the Younger Lady is Tutankhamun's mother, but not Nefertiti. The controversy over Nefertiti's resting place is in some ways an extension of the tumult that experienced in life. The pharaoh Akhenaten, her husband, upended centuries of polytheistic tradition and converted Egypt to the worship of the sun god Aten, even going so far as to construct a new capital city among 250 miles to the north of the previous capital, Thebes. This swept the country into disarray, and the changes he wrought would ultimately be overturned. During this time, some Egyptologists believe that Nefertiti came to rule as a pharaoh in her own right, possibly under the name Smenkhare. She would have reigned for no more than a year or two, but she died. Pharaoh or not, her royal status meant she would have been mummified according to tradition. Priests would have removed her organs and washed her body with a solution of natron, a natural occurring soda ash similar to modern baking soda. They then would have placed packets of linen, resin, and natron in her body cavities and anointed her body with oils and resin. Finally, they would have wrapped layer upon layer of resin-soaked linen around her body, sealing the queen in an anti-microbial shroud. While we know that she lived, and what would have happened to her after death, we are still missing the critical piece of evidence that would tie her story together. Nefertiti herself. It's a cold case for the ages.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.